He paid $3 for her, a mountain woman no one cared to claim. Widower Colton Hayes hadn't gone to that auction looking for trouble, only supplies for the ranch. But when she spoke her name, the ground shifted beneath everything he thought he knew. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sale was nearly finished when Colton first laid eyes on her. Most men had drifted off after the cattle and horses were gone. What stood tied to the post now wasn't livestock. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her tangled hair wild as the ridges she came from her hands, strong enough to snap a fence post in two. Her clothes were little more than tatters. Folks called her Mountain Woman said she'd been spotted surviving alone up in the high country, trapping and hunting like some wild creature. $3 barked Virgil Dunn, the auctioneer voice, sharp but weary. That's all I need. $3 for a strong back. A hard worker eats little, doesn't talk much. Virgil pushed. The crowd chuckled, a few trading crude remarks Colton ignored. He hadn't come for this. He needed wire for fencing seed for spring, maybe a cheap mule. But then his mind turned to Ethan, 9 years old, and already carrying a man's weight, and Lydia Grace, just 6, still whispering for her mama in the dark. It had been nearly a year since Margaret Maggie Lane was laid to rest. The house grew quieter every day, the work heavier. The land didn't care about grief, it demanded, and demanded until a man broke. $3, Virgil called again, his tone more plea than promise. Somebody take her off my hands. Colton lifted his hand. I'll take her. A ripple of surprise ran through the few who lingered. No one else offered a bid. Sold, Virgil declared, slapping the table. To the widower, $3. Colton stepped forward, pressing the coins into Virgil's palm. The woman turned her head just enough for him to catch the steel gray of her eyes, sharp and unblinking. Virgil untied the rope and shoved it toward him. She's yours now. Good luck. Laughter followed them as Colton led her away, but she didn't falter or hang her head. She walked beside him in silence, her stride nearly matching his own. When they reached the wagon, he asked, "Name?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, she answered, Abigail Monroe. The road home was long and cut deep with ruts. The wagon groaned as it climbed out of town toward the hills. Abigail sat stiff beside him, hands folded in her lap, silent as carved stone. Colton couldn't shake the sound of that name. Abigail. Before Maggie, before children, before the ranch, there'd been another life, one he never spoke of, and that name belonged to it. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun burned low, painting the sky red and gold. The house looked lonelier than ever, a single mark against endless land. Ethan was out front, swinging an axe too heavy for his shoulders. He dropped it when he saw the wagon. Lydia Grace came bounding from the porch, barefoot curls bouncing as she called for her father. Colton climbed down. Got someone to help around here? He said gruffly, motioning toward Abigail. Her name's Abigail. She'll be staying. Ethan stared. Lydia clung tight to her father's leg. Abigail gave a single nod before hefting a sack of feed as if it weighed nothing. Ethan's eyes widened, but he said nothing. That night, once the chores were finished and the children slept, Colton sat at the table, staring across the lamplight at her. You're not from around here, he said at last. No, she answered. Her gaze never wavered. You knew me once? A chill knifed through him. Why'd you say yes to being sold? Because $3 beats starving, she said, calm as stone. And because I wanted to see if you'd remember me. Colton's breath caught memories stirring like ghosts of a reckless young man and the woman who'd walked away before he could wreck her life. But before he could speak again, a heavy rap sounded at the door. Colton's heart pounded as he rose. Nobody knocked at his door after dark. He yanked it open, and there stood a man he hadn't laid eyes on in over a decade, smiling like a wolf. "Well," the man drawled, stepping inside without waiting. "Hayes, didn't figure I'd find you holed up out here. And look at this, you've bought yourself some company." Colton's stomach turned to ice. The stranger's eyes slid to Abigail and lit with recognition. "Well now," he said softly. "Ain't this something?" The man filled the doorway as if it belonged to him. Dusty boots, a travel-worn coat, a grin that never touched his eyes. Colton stiffened. He hadn't seen Rowan Pike in over 10 years, but nothing about him had changed. Rowan still carried that charm that soured to rot once you got too close. Smooth words, slick hands, twisting everything to his favor. Colton's hand twitched toward the rifle near the hearth, but he stopped himself. Rowan didn't need that kind of welcome. "Didn't know you'd settled down, Colton," Rowan drawled, moving farther into the room. His gaze swept the humble furnishings, the children's boots lined at the door, and finally rested on Abigail. "Abigail," he said, slow, deliberate, savoring the name like it was stolen whiskey. "Didn't think I'd see you again either." Her jaw clenched, but she gave him nothing. Colton's mind spun Rowan Pike, of all men, and Abigail knowing him too. "What do you want?" Colton asked flatly. Rowan spread his hands as if this were some neighborly call. "Just passing through. Saw a familiar wagon. Thought I'd say hello." But Colton knew better. Rowan Pike never passed through anywhere without reason. The silence stretched sharp as a drawn bowstring. Finally, Rowan smirked. "Nice little setup you've got here, Hayes. 2 kids, a woman. Looks to me like you've got yourself a family again." Rowan Pike's voice dripped with mockery. Colton Hayes stepped forward, planting himself between Rowan and the table, where Abigail Monroe sat stiff as stone. "Say what you came to say, Rowan." Rowan smirked. "Word is there are folks up north looking for her. Folks with deep pockets. Hand her over. I walk away and you'll never hear my boots on your porch again." Colton's chest tightened. He glanced at Abigail. She didn't flinch, didn't deny it. Rowan leaned on the doorframe, casual as any gambler in a saloon. "She's worth more than $3, Hayes. Worth a hell of a lot more. And you and I both know money's been tight ever since you buried Maggie Lane." The words struck like a knife to the ribs, but Colton didn't move. "Get out," he said quietly. Rowan tilted his head. "You sure think about the kids. Land like this eats a man alive. I'm giving you a way out." Colton's jaw locked. "I said get out." The smirk slipped. Rowan stepped closer, the air turning darker. "Careful, Colton. You always thought you were better than me. But you and I were cut from the same cloth. We both know how to take what we want." Abigail rose her chair, scraping against the floor. Her voice was low but steady. "You're not taking anything." Rowan turned toward her, eyes gleaming. "Always did have spirit. Shame you wasted it on the wrong man." Colton stepped in front of her. Rowan's laugh was cold and humorless. "Fine. Keep her. But don't say I didn't warn you." He brushed past Colton, yanking the door open. Before leaving, he threw a glance sharp as broken glass. "They'll come for her, Hayes. And when they do, you'll wish you'd taken my offer." The door slammed behind him. The room stayed heavy with silence long after his footsteps faded. The fire snapped in the hearth. Colton finally turned to Abigail. "What was that about?" Her face was pale hands gripping the edge of the table. "He's not wrong. There are people hunting me, but not for the reasons he thinks." Colton waited. Abigail's gray eyes met his. "I wasn't born in those mountains. I ran there. The man I was supposed to marry murdered my brother, Daniel Monroe. His kin, the Whitlocks, want me dead for speaking the truth." The words landed like a hammer blow. Colton leaned back slowly. Memories stirring of the fierce young woman he once knew. A woman who walked away before either of them could ruin the other. And here she was again, danger trailing her shadow. That night, Colton barely slept. Every groan of the timbers, every sigh of the wind had him on edge, rifle within reach. Abigail sat by the fire until dawn, running a whetstone over a hunting knife like it was part of her breath. Ethan Cole stirred first, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Pa," he whispered. Colton motioned him quiet. "Wake your sister. Get your boots on." Abigail glanced up. "You think you'll be back?" Colton nodded grimly. "Rowan Pike doesn't walk away from anything. If he says they're coming, they're coming." By sunrise, Colton had the horses saddled, food packed, the fire doused. Ethan helped load the rifles, his boyish face set with a grimness far too old for his years. Lydia Grace clung to Abigail's hand, silent and wide-eyed. Colton cinched the last strap on the wagon and looked across his land. Leaving felt like laying another piece of himself in the ground, but he'd buried enough already. They rolled out before the mist lifted wagon wheels, groaning across the frozen earth. Abigail rode beside him, her gray eyes scanning the horizon. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "No," Colton replied. "This is Rowan's doing, and whoever he's dragging with him." She didn't argue, but her hands knotted in her lap. Hours dragged in silence, each bend of the trail threatening ambush. And then trouble came. The first gunshot split the still morning, shattering the wagon rail beside Colton's head. Ethan screamed, Lydia ducked against Abigail. Down Colton roared, snapping the reins. The horses lunged forward. 3 riders burst from the trees, faces covered, guns blazing. Abigail snatched the rifle, spun, and fired. One man reeled back, clutching his arm. Another shot punched through the canvas inches from Ethan's head. Colton drove the team hard toward the river bend. He knew these trails, knew where they narrowed, knew where the land might give them a fighting chance. "Hold on," he shouted, as the wagon slammed through a rut, nearly tipping. Lydia screamed. Behind them, the riders closed fast. And then Colton saw it, the bluff ahead, a sheer drop to the river below. The horses wouldn't stop. The ground raced toward them, wheels screaming on the rocks. Colton hauled the reins, but the terrified team slid and skidded toward the edge. Then Abigail moved, hurling herself from the bench, seizing the bridle of the lead horse with both hands. "Whoa!" Her roar split the chaos. The horse reared, muscles straining, eyes rolling white. Abigail Monroe held on like a woman born to wrestle the earth itself. Heels dug deep into the frozen ground, every muscle straining as she fought to wrench the panicked horses from the cliff's edge. The wagon lurched sideways, one wheel lifting clear, and Ethan Cole screamed, clutching Lydia Grace tight against his chest. Abigail Colton Hayes bellowed, leaping from the seat to throw his shoulder into the wagon frame, his boots skidding across the dirt. With one last, desperate heave, Abigail yanked the team's heads around. The horses stumbled back a step, just enough for Colton to slam his weight down and level the wagon before it tipped. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then another gunshot split the air. The bullet smashed into the wagon bed, splinters flying. Abigail spun, rifle already in her hands, firing in one clean motion. The nearest rider's hat went spinning as he ducked his horse, veering wildly. Colton vaulted back onto the bench, snapping the reins. The horses lunged forward, hooves pounding hard away from the bluff across the rocky trail. The outlaws regrouped quickly. 2 broke wide, flanking, while the third charged straight at them. "Get under the tarp! Pull your sister down!" Colton shouted. Ethan obeyed without a word, dragging Lydia beneath the cover as another bullet ripped through the canvas. Abigail fired again, the recoil slamming into her shoulder, but she didn't falter. Her shot hit true, the lead rider's horse shrieking as it crashed sideways into brush and rock. 2 remained relentless. One cut ahead, angling for the narrow pass Colton had hoped to reach. "They're boxing us in," Abigail shouted. Colton's jaw clenched. He knew this land better than any man alive, but not with a wagon, not with 2 children huddled in the back. He snapped the reins, steering hard for the river crossing instead. The water would be near ice, the current swift, but it was their only chance. The wagon thundered down the embankment wheels, bouncing over roots and stone. The river came into view, wide and churning mist curling above its surface. Behind them, hoofbeats closed in fast. Colton didn't hesitate. He drove the team straight into the shallows. Ice water exploded high, soaking coats and boots. The horses screamed, fighting the pull, but they kept moving, muscles straining as the wagon groaned under the current. Abigail reloaded with steady hands, even as the wagon rocked beneath her. She fired the crack, echoing across the water. One rider veered off his mount, panicking as the river swallowed its hooves. The last man pressed on, eyes wild, determined to cut them down, even if it meant drowning. Colton whipped the reins harder, the water rising to the wagon bed, soaking the tarp, where Ethan and Lydia clung together. Wheels ground over hidden rocks, threatening to tear loose at any second. Almost there, Colton shouted. Abigail fired her last round. The shot rang true, knocking the rifle clean from the outlaw's grip. He cursed, hauling his horse back as the animal flailed against the torrent. Then the wagon jolted violently as a wheel slammed against a submerged boulder. The axle groaned, splintering. Colton Abigail cried. He lashed the reins, urging the team forward with every ounce of strength in his arms. The wheel caught again, then finally broke free. The wagon lurched up the far bank, water cascading off its sides. Colton didn't dare look back until solid ground lay beneath them. When he did, the riders were gone. For now. He pressed the team on until 3 hard miles separated them from the river. At last he pulled into a stand of pines, letting the horses blow. Steam rose from their coats, breath puffing white in the chill air. Ethan crawled from under the tarp, drenched and shaking, Lydia's small hand clutched in his own. "You all right?" Colton rasped. Ethan nodded, teeth chattering. Lydia buried her face against his chest, too frightened to look. Abigail slid down from the wagon skirts, heavy with water. She checked the horses first, running a steady hand down their trembling necks before turning to Colton. "We can't keep running like this," she said. "Not with the children. Not with a wagon they can track." Colton rubbed his face, exhaustion pressing down on him. "We can't go back home either. Rowan Pike will head there first." Abigail's eyes sharpened. "Then we go higher, into the ridges. They won't follow far up there." He stared at her, recalling the tales of the woman folks had called wild, the one who lived where few dared tread. "You know the mountains." She nodded once. "Better than anyone." Colton exhaled. "All right, you lead." They traveled until dusk, the land growing rougher, trails narrowing to nothing but deer paths. Abigail moved with purpose, sure-footed, as though the earth itself had carved the way for her. By the time they stopped, the children were already asleep, firelight flickering against the black sky. Colton sat across from Abigail, the flames throwing sharp shadows over her features. "You said they won't stop until you're dead," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the fire. "Because I told the truth. Men like them don't forgive women who won't stay silent." Colton's gaze shifted to Ethan, curled around Lydia, and something cold and furious stirred in his chest. "Then they'll have to go through me first." Abigail's eyes lifted to his. For the first time since he'd bought her something flickered there. Not defiance. Not anger. Something that looked like hope. But far off in the dark, a wolf's mournful howl carried through the pines. Colton's hand drifted toward his rifle. Out here, hope was no promise of safety. The night dragged on restless. Every crack of a twig, every whisper of wind through the trees, had Colton wide-eyed rifle ready. Abigail never truly slept, either sitting with her back to a tree knife in her lap, eyes reflecting firelight like some wild creature who had survived too long without rest. By dawn, frost lay brittle across the ground. Colton rose quietly, boots crunching soft, as he checked the horses. One of the horses favored a front leg, strained from the river crossing. It would carry weight for now, but not for long. Abigail Monroe crouched beside Colton Hayes, without a word, her fingers running skillfully along the animal's tendons. "We'll need to take the ridge slow," she murmured. "Too steep for a lame horse." Colton gave a short nod. He wasn't used to being told the trail, but something in her calm certainty made it easy to follow. They packed camp quickly. Ethan Cole hefted Lydia Grace on his hip, his young face set with a determination Colton hated seeing in a boy so small. The path ahead clawed upward switchbacks cut long ago by deer and a handful of trappers now gone to dust. The higher they climbed, the quieter it grew, even the wind holding its breath. By midday, they reached a rocky shelf that overlooked the valley. From there, Colton saw his whole world spread below the ribbon of river, the patchwork of pasture and timber, and far off to the east, the faint haze of the town where $3 had changed his life forever. Ethan joined him, eyes wide. "Pa, we can see everything." Colton rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yeah. But remember, they can see us too. Keep moving." Abigail had already scouted ahead, silent as a shadow. She returned, gray eyes sharp. "There's an old trapper's cabin half a mile up. Roof's gone, but the walls are sound." "Will it hide us?" Colton asked. Her mouth twitched. "So long as no one knows to look." They reached the cabin just before dusk. 4 log walls sunk half into the ground roof, long collapsed under winters of snow. Still, it was shelter, and Colton wasn't in a position to be choosy. They set to clearing debris. Abigail worked like a storm, hauling beams twice her size, while Colton cut branches for a new frame. Ethan tried to help, his skinny arms shaking under each load of brush. Here, Abigail said, gentler than Colton had ever heard her. She crouched beside Ethan, showing him how to weave branches tighter, stronger. His eyes lit with pride as he got it right, chest puffing a little. Colton felt something twist inside him at the sight. Not just that she was strong, it was the way his children were starting to look at her like she belonged. And that scared him more than Rowan Pike ever had. By nightfall, the cabin had a makeshift roof of pine boughs and bark enough to keep out the worst of the wind. The fire inside filled the cramped space with smoky warmth, and for the first time since fleeing the ranch, Lydia laughed soft and surprised like she'd forgotten she could. Colton caught himself watching Abigail more than he wanted, the way she coaxed Lydia into eating, the way her gray eyes softened when Ethan showed her a crooked carving from his pocket knife. Later, after the children slept, he sat beside her at the fire. "You were always like this," he said quietly. She glanced at him. "Like what's strong? Like the land couldn't bend you?" Her gaze stayed on the flames. "The land bent me plenty. I just didn't break." Colton studied her profile in the firelight, wondering if he'd ever really known her. The peace shattered quick. Near midnight, he woke to the horses snorting in panic. Abigail was already on her feet, knife in hand. "Stay with the kids," Colton whispered, grabbing the rifle. He slipped into the freezing dark breath, white in the air. The horses shifted nervously at the edge of the clearing, ears pricked. Then he heard careful footfalls, crunching frost, too measured to be animal. "Show yourself," Colton barked. A figure stepped from the tree line, hands raised. "Easy, Hayes," the man drawled. Colton's grip tightened. Rowan Pike's grin cut through the dark. "Knew you'd run high. You always liked the ridges. Colton lifted the rifle, but Rowan didn't blink. Shoot me and my boys cut you down before you reload. You know I ain't alone. Shapes slid from the shadows, 4, 5, 6 men. Colton's gut turned to stone. You can't win this, Rowan said softly. Hand her over. Take your kids. Go home. You'll never see me again. Abigail's voice cut through the night, sharp and steady. He's not handing me over. Rowan's grin widened. There she is, always siding wrong. Colton shifted closer to Abigail, rifle steady. Then I guess Rowan's voice went smooth as silk. We end this the hard way. The first gunshot split the night. Colton fired back, instinctively recoil, slamming his shoulder. One of Rowan's men dropped with a curse, clutching his arm. In here, Colton shouted. Ethan scrambled, dragging Lydia deeper inside the cabin as bullets tore through the pine roof bark and needles raining down. Abigail fired next, her shot clean dropping a man in the snow. Rowan didn't shoot. He just grinned like a man already counting victory. Don't fret, Hayes, he shouted. I'll see your kids are cared for when this is over. Colton's blood boiled. He leaned from the broken doorway, sighted down his barrel, and fired. The bullet shaved a lock of hair from Rowan's head, and the grin finally faltered. You're dead, Hayes, Rowan hissed. Then the night erupted in gunfire. Bullets splintered the walls. Inside, Lydia screamed as a round chewed the logs inches from her head. Ethan threw himself over her small hands, trembling jaw set. Abigail ducked low, reloading fast. She moved like someone who'd lived too long with danger. Colton, she shouted. We can't hold here. He fired 2 more rounds, ducked as bullets chewed the doorframe. Where? Her eyes cut to the back wall, pressed against a steep drop into the trees. We jump. Colton stared. It's 20 feet down. Better than waiting to die. She slung the rifle, scooped Lydia against her chest. Ethan? Stay with your pa, she barked. Colton fired once more, then grabbed Ethan into his arms. Heart hammering, he met Abigail's eyes. Go. The last thing Colton saw before leaping was Rowan Pike's face twisted in fury, muzzle flash lighting his grin like a wolf's. Then they were falling branches, clawing ground, rushing up until blackness swallowed everything. Pain woke him. Not sharp, but a deep, grinding ache sunk into his ribs. Colton's eyes cracked open to gray light and the whisper of wind through the trees. He came to on his back, half buried in pine needles and snowmelt coat torn and soaked through. For a moment, he couldn't piece together how he'd landed there. Then it bled back in fragments gunfire, Abigail Monroe's shout. Ethan Cole's weight in his arms, the cabin wall giving way beneath their feet. Colton Hayes sat up fast, pain ripping through his ribs. Fire flared along his side, likely cracked. Maybe broken. Didn't matter. He twisted, scanning the brush. Ethan. His voice was hoarse. A weak cough answered from 10 feet away. Colton scrambled, palms stinging in the cold. Ethan was crouched behind a moss-covered rock, blood trickling from a shallow cut on his forehead, but awake, alive. His wide eyes locked on Colton's. Lydia, he whispered. Colton's gut clenched. I don't know, he rasped. And then he heard its footsteps crunching hard through snow and branches. He raised his rifle and froze. Abigail stepped out of the trees, Lydia Grace wrapped tight in her arms, a pistol gripped in her free hand. Her braid had come loose. Mud streaked her face. Blood soaked through her sleeve, but she never slowed. Colton rushed to them, dropping to his knees. Lydia stirred with a whimper. She's all right. Abigail rasped, breath ragged. bumped her head, scared more than hurt. Colton brushed a trembling hand through his daughter's curls. She blinked up at him, dazed, but conscious. Relief crashed over him so strong it near knocked the breath from his chest. Abigail didn't sit, didn't ease. "We have to move." Colton nodded, hauling Ethan to his feet. Shouts drifted faint from behind. "They found the cabin," he muttered. "Won't take long to track us down." Abigail's eyes swept the ridge. "There's a ravine ahead, narrow and steep. We can lose them in there. How far? 2 miles, maybe less." Ethan leaned hard into Colton's side, limping, but his jaw was set. "I can make it." So they pressed on, quick and quiet, weaving between the pines, snow glittering like shards of glass in the morning light. Every sound behind them set Colton's spine rigid. Abigail led wounded but tireless. She never faltered, never looked back. Colton watched her, the woman he'd bought for $3, carrying his daughter like her own, driving them through frost and blood and gunfire like she was carved for it. Something inside him cracked open, something sealed tight since the day they laid Maggie Lane in the ground. The ravine yawned before them, a deep gash in the earth shadow swallowing the bottom. Abigail slid down first heels, digging, bracing with one hand. Colton passed Lydia into her arms, then guided Ethan down. The walls closed in air, colder icicles, hanging sharp from stone shelves. Their steps echoed with the drip of melting frost. They ducked into a shallow cave, no deeper than a bear's den. Colton touched Abigail's arm, their first real touch since the ranch. "You're bleeding." "I know. Let me see." She hesitated, then sat. He peeled back torn fabric. The wound wasn't deep, but bled heavy. He cleaned it with melted snow, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind it. Abigail never flinched. Colton asked, "Where'd you learn to fight like that because I had to?" she said flatly. "There's more to it than that." Her jaw tightened, then she sighed. "After Daniel Monroe was killed, I ran, thought I'd hide in the hills. But I wasn't the only one running. Found others women, mostly. Some carried worse scars than mine. We kept each other alive, taught each other the things the world wouldn't." Colton looked at her scarred, capable hands. "You ever wonder what it might have been like if we'd stayed in touch?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer at once. Then her gray eyes lifted to his. "Sometimes. But back then you weren't ready for someone like me." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not." She leaned her head against the stone wall, whispering, "But you are now." The words hung between them, heavy and real. Neither spoke again. They stayed in the ravine that night. No fire, no noise. Ethan curled around Lydia, both too drained to move. Abigail kept watchblade in her lap, eyes gleaming in the dark. When Colton offered to take a turn, she shook her head. "You trust too easy. That's how men like Rowan Pike stay alive." By morning, fresh snow hid their tracks, but Colton knew better than to think they were safe. They pushed higher into the hill's trees, stunted by thin air. Near midday, they reached a rocky pass, cliffs jagged as broken teeth. Abigail stopped scanning the ridge. There she pointed to a shadowed overhang. Old mining camp. Been dead for years. They climbed hard, scrambling up. Ethan slipped once, nearly tumbling, but Colton caught him fast. Just as they reached the ledge, a sharp crack split the stillness. Gunfire. Distant but clear. Colton spun. Men were scaling the ridge below. Rowan Pike's men. Abigail hissed. 6 at least, maybe more. Then came the sound that froze Colton's blood. "They've got dogs, 2 collapsed shacks, a rusted water drum, and a mine shaft nearly buried in rubble." Colton Hayes scanned the place and said, "We hold here, too exposed to run, and climbing higher's a death wish." Abigail Monroe didn't argue. She crouched near the shaft, pulling boards from an old crate. "You ever set a trap, Colton?" He raised a brow. "Plenty." "Why?" "Because if we fall here," she said, stuffing powder from a busted stick of dynamite into a torn satchel, "I'm dragging some of them with us." They moved fast. Only one narrow path led to the camp. Everything else was sheer cliff and broken stone. Abigail wedged the satchel under a rock lip, tying a cord that looped back to her belt. "Trip this," she muttered, "and the blast will bury the trail," Risky Colton said. "So is staying alive." They took positions behind the water drum, and a half-fallen wall rifle steady. Ethan Cole huddled with Lydia Grace inside one shack, hidden behind crates. A tense silence stretched, then movement. A figure topped the trail. Rowan pike rifle across his back, smiling like winter itself. 3 more men followed close. "Don't see her yet," one muttered. "She's here," Rowan said coldly. "I can smell her." Colton steadied his rifle. Abigail's hand rested on the wire. "Any last words?" she asked without looking at him. He thought a moment, then said, "You were always worth more than $3. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. Rowan stepped closer. Then Ethan's scream ripped the stillness. "Pa Lydia. She's not breathing." Colton froze. So did Abigail. Rowan didn't. He charged. "I'll cover them," Abigail barked. "Go." Colton bolted for the shack as gunfire exploded around him. Behind the ridge thundered the blast, roaring like the earth itself tore open. Rock and smoke swallowed the trail. He stumbled through the haze, eyes burning, until he found Ethan kneeling Lydia limp in his arms. Her lips were blue, her chest still. "No, no, no," Colton rasped, dropping beside them. He pulled her up, tilting her chin, forcing breath into her lungs, pressing down hard on her tiny chest. "Come on, baby girl. Breathe." Nothing. He kept going, heart pounding like a war drum. Ethan sobbed. "Please, Lydia, please." Then her chest hitched a ragged gasp. Again and again. Colton's relief broke out in a near sob as he rocked her gently, whispering, "Stay with me, sweetheart. Stay right here." Outside, gunfire cracked. Through the shattered wall, he saw Abigail braced behind the drum rifle, steady side bleeding fresh. Every shot she fired found its mark, but Rowan was still standing caked in dirt and fury. He clawed through the rubble, face-twisted eyes wild. Left side. Colton shouted, setting Lydia with Ethan. Abigail swung her aim, dropping another man before he could flank. Rowan grinned, teeth flashing. "Running out of lead, girl." "Still got enough for you," she shot back. Colton burst from the shack rifle, blazing. His shot clipped Rowan's shoulder, spinning him, but the man charged, swinging his rifle stock like a club. It cracked against Abigail's arm with a sickening thud, her weapon flying. She snarled, lunging barehanded. They hit the dirt hard, Rowan's hand clamping her throat. Colton roared, slamming into him. They tumbled fists and boots, striking years of hate, boiling over. "You think you can take what's mine?" Rowan spat, blood streaking his mouth. "You think a broken woman like her belongs to you?" Colton's fist smashed his jaw. "She doesn't belong to anyone." Rowan's hand flashed knife in his grip blade, driving for Colton's ribs. Colton caught his wrist muscles burning as steel edged closer. Pa Ethan cried from the doorway. "Stay back!" Colton snarled, every sinew straining. Rowan grinned through blood. "She ain't worth it, Hayes." "Never was." Colton's rage surged white-hot. She was worth everything. With a roar, he forced Rowan's hand away, slamming his skull into the ground once, twice, until the fight drained out of him, and the knife clattered loose. Breathing ragged, Colton staggered back. Abigail rolled to her side, clutching her throat, rasping. "Took you long enough." Colton offered his hand. She hesitated, then gripped it, pulling herself up. "You all right?" he asked. "I've had worse." The remaining men rattled and bloodied, dragged their wounded, and fled down the ridge, leaving Rowan broken in the dirt. The blast had wiped out the only trail higher. Colton Hayes stood over Rowan Pike's limp body rifle, heavy in his hands. "You gonna kill him?" Abigail Monroe asked quietly. Colton stared down at the man who'd hunted them for days, who'd nearly torn everything from his grasp. He didn't answer right away. Then he slung the rifle over his shoulder. "No. He lives with knowing he lost." They worked quick. Abigail bound her bleeding arm with another strip of cloth, while Colton dragged Rowan to a tree, tying him with his own belt and rope, just enough to keep him breathing, not enough to let him free. By the time they finished, the sky was bruising toward dusk. Inside the shack, Ethan Cole sat with Lydia Grace tucked against him, feeding her crumbs of biscuit with shaky hands. Colton knelt before them. "You both did good," he murmured. Ethan lifted his face, streaked with dirt and tears. "Is it over?" Colton's gaze flicked to Abigail. She met his eyes, unreadable. "For now," Colton said. That night they stayed in the ruined camp. A low fire smoldered behind the broken wall. Colton leaned back against the stones, Lydia asleep in his arms, Ethan curled tight against his side. Abigail sat opposite, half her eyes closed, but watchful still. After a long silence, Colton spoke. "You never told me your real name." Her gaze lifted. "No masks now, no walls." "Abigail," she said softly. "Abigail Monroe." The name struck him like a bell. Margaret Maggie Lane's middle name had been Abigail. For a long moment he said nothing, only listening to the fire pop. But inside something shifted like a missing piece falling into place. She hadn't been some stranger he bought for $3. She was meant to be here. Outside the wind hissed through the pines like a warning. Rowan Pike might have lost today, but Colton knew he'd be back. And next time there'd be no running. Morning broke sharp frost clinging to the stones. Colton woke, stiff ribs aching, but Lydia's warm weight grounded him. Her small hand curled in his shirt. Abigail was already crouched at the fire pit, coaxing embers to life. Pale from blood loss, but steady-eyed. Colton handed Lydia to Ethan, then stepped out into the gray dawn. The trail behind was blocked by the blast, sealed under rubble. But Rowan was gone. The rope dangled loose. Colton's gut clenched. Someone had taken him. Abigail stepped beside him, following his gaze. "He's free." "Yeah." From the doorway, Ethan's small voice carried. "What happens now?" "Pa." Colton turned. His boy stood there with Lydia clinging to his hand, both of them looking older than they should. He crouched down. "Now we go home." Ethan frowned. "But he'll come for us." Colton nodded. "I know. But we can't keep running." Abigail adjusted the rifle on her shoulder. "Men like him don't stop." Colton met her eyes. "Then we stop him." They moved all day, descending the ridges along hidden trails Abigail knew by heart. She walked ahead, steady a woman reshaped by years of survival. Watching her cut the path stirred something painful in Colton. She had become someone entirely different, forged by necessity. By mid-afternoon, the ranch appeared quiet under snow, chimney-cold fences half buried in drifts, hollow, abandoned. Ethan gripped Colton's sleeve. "It doesn't look like home anymore." Colton laid a hand on his shoulder. "That's why we'll fix it." Inside the cabin felt strange dust layered the table tools scattered where they'd fallen the night of the attack. Colton set Lydia near the hearth and knelt to build a fire. Abigail began clearing the table, restoring order, like she'd always belonged there. Ethan gathered tools without being told. Slowly, the room felt less broken. That night, when the children slept, Colton watched Abigail mend her arm by firelight. "You didn't have to come back," he said quietly. Her eyes stayed on the cloth. "I told you I'm not leaving them. And me," his voice rough. She stilled, then set the cloth down. "And you." Silence filled the space, heavy but not unwelcome. "I buried Maggie on the hill by the orchard," Colton whispered. "She deserved better than the man I was then." "You're not that man anymore," Abigail said. "I want to be better for them. For you." Her lips curved just slightly. "Then be better." The days that followed were quieter. Colton fixed fences, split wood, worked the barn. Abigail tended stock, helped Ethan teach Lydia her letters. But both kept watch. One morning, fresh boot tracks marred the snow near the property. Abigail crouched low, eyes sharp. "He's close." The weight of it settled like stone in Colton's chest. That night, snow drifted soft as feathers. He tucked the children into bed, lingered longer than usual, memorizing their peaceful faces. Then he stepped outside. Abigail waited, rifle slung across her back. "You're thinking what I'm thinking," she said. Colton nodded. "We end this tomorrow." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. "Then tonight, we rest. Might be the last time." They stood side by side in the cold, until Colton reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Morning came sharp and still. Colton rose early, saddled his horse, checked his rifle. Inside, Ethan sat at the table, eyes red. "You're going after him," he said. Colton crouched. "I am. But I'll be back." "Bring her back too," Ethan whispered. Colton swallowed hard. "I will." Abigail stepped outside, already dressed for the ride. "You didn't think you'd leave me behind." Colton didn't argue. Together they mounted up, leaving the children behind the cabin walls. Neither spoke as the ranch faded into the winter horizon. By midday, they found the tracks again. They trailed the prints through the timber, across frozen streams, climbing toward the high ridges. Colton Hayes felt it before he saw it, the quiet press of danger, the way the birds had gone silent. Abigail Monroe slowed her horse, scanning the trees. "He's here." A voice echoed sharp through the pines. "You should have stayed gone, Hayes." Rowan Pike stepped from behind a trunk rifle in hand, a cruel grin cutting across his face. "You came back for her," he said, nodding toward Abigail. "Should have known you always had a weakness for broken things." Colton didn't move. "Funny, you always had a weakness for losing." Rowan's grin widened. "Let's finish this." Colton swung down from his saddle rifle, steady. Abigail dismounted too, eyes locked on the man who had hunted them across miles of snow and blood. The forest held its breath. Snow crunched under boots. Rowan raised his rifle. Colton lifted his. The first shot cracked like thunder. Colton dove sideways, snow exploding where he'd stood, Rowan's bullet splintering a pine trunk. Abigail moved fast, wounded arm forgotten. She slid behind a fallen log, sighting down her rifle with steady hands. Her return shot tore through Rowan's coat, close enough to make him curse and stumble for cover. Colton rolled to one knee, firing back. Splinters burst from Rowan's tree. Rowan laughed, wild and sharp. "You think you can beat me, Hayes? You don't have it in you." Colton's jaw tightened as he slid to better cover. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Ethan Cole, for Lydia Grace, for Abigail. Their eyes met across the snow, wordless but clear. "One of us has to end this." Rowan fired again, the bullet singing past Abigail's ear. She flinched, but never broke. Colton circled wide boots, crunching. He knew this land knew where the snow hid danger. He forced Rowan back toward a narrow gully drifted deep. Rowan stepped, his foot sank. Colton surged, slamming into him. They crashed to the ground, rifles lost in the snow. Rowan struck first, his fist cracking Colton's jaw. Pain burst white-hot, but Colton grappled, teeth gritted, fighting for Rowan's knife hand. Colton Abigail shouted, sprinting toward them, rifle forgotten. The knife flashed. Rowan drove it down, biting deep into Colton's shoulder. Colton roared, twisting, wrenching Rowan's wrist until the blade clattered free. Rowan swung wild fists, but Colton blocked, hammering his own into Rowan's jaw. Once. Twice. A third time sent Rowan sprawling in the snow, blood pouring from his mouth. Colton staggered up, chest heaving, blood seeping hot from his shoulder. He snatched a fallen rifle, leveled it at Rowan's head. Abigail reached him, breath-ragged. Colton. He didn't look at her. His finger curled the trigger. You kill him, she said low, and you'll spend the rest of your days looking over your shoulder. But if you don't, he'll come back, Colton rasped. Rowan coughed, spitting blood, grinning. Damn right I will. Colton stared a long moment, the world narrowed to the man at his feet. Then slowly, he lowered the rifle. You'll rot in a sheriff's cell, he said coldly. Die forgotten. That's worse than anything I could give you now. Rowan's eyes widened as Colton stepped back. Abigail didn't argue. Together they bound his hands and feet, dragging him to a tree, tying him so tight he couldn't move. You ain't seen the last of me, Rowan spat through bloodied teeth. Colton met his glare. You already lost. They left him there knowing lawmen would find him soon enough. The ride back was quiet snow drifting soft from the sky. Colton's shoulder burned with every step of his horse, but Abigail's steady presence dulled the ache. When the ranch came into view, Ethan ran from the cabin with Lydia in his arms. You came back, he cried, voice breaking with relief. Colton slid from the saddle, barely steadying himself before Ethan crashed into him. Lydia wriggled free, reaching for her father. Colton dropped to his knees, pulling both children tight against him. It's over, he whispered. We're safe. Abigail dismounted slowly, watching with an expression soft and strange. Ethan turned to her wide-eyed. Are you staying? She froze, glanced at Colton. He said nothing, only held her gaze steady. At last her lips curved quiet as the falling snow. If you'll have me. Ethan grinned so wide it nearly split his face. Lydia, still clutching her father's hand, reached for Abigail's. Abigail took it. Abigail. That night, with the children asleep, Colton stood at the window staring at the moonlit hills. Abigail came beside him, her presence warm despite the chill. You could have killed him, she said softly. I thought about it, but you didn't. He looked at her. Because of you. Her head tilted, eyes steady. What now, Colton Hayes? He drew a long breath, the weight of it all beginning to ease. Turning to Abigail Monroe, Colton said, Now we build something better. Her eyes searched his for a beat, and then at last she smiled. A real smile. Small, but certain. But in the shadowed tree line, unseen eyes watched the ranch. Some men didn't stop at one failure. Colton Hayes's fight wasn't finished. Winter loosened its grip slowly like a tired hand letting go. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to breathe again. Colton mended fences with Ethan Cole at his side, teaching him to drive nails straight and true. Abigail, still favoring her injured arm, slipped into the rhythm of cabin life, as though she'd always belonged there, cooking with Ethan, reading to Lydia Grace, by the fire carrying water when Colton forgot to ask. There was laughter again. Real laughter. The kind Colton thought he had buried with Margaret Maggie Lane. Lydia trailed after Abigail, constantly small hands clutching her skirts as if she feared letting go. Ethan, quieter than his sister, began to look at her like she was no longer a stranger. Colton found himself watching all of it in quiet wonder. Sometimes in the middle of his chores, he'd pause, hammer in hand boots caked with dirt, and just breathe. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive. But his rifle never sat far from reach. The first sign came nailed to a fence post in the east pasture. A dead crow. Colton spotted it before Ethan did. He tore it down jaw tight, burying it under the snow. At supper, Abigail caught the silence in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked low. He hesitated. Nothing worth the children worrying over. She gave him a look that said she didn't believe him. Later, when the kids slept, she stood at the window, arms folded. "He's back." Colton didn't answer. "You should have killed him," she whispered. Colton stared into the fire. "Maybe. But that'd make me no better than him." Abigail studied him for a long moment. "You're nothing like him." The days grew restless. Footprints showed up in the snow near the barn, always just far enough away to be seen but never close enough to catch. Ethan began waking at night, whispering he'd heard someone outside. Colton sat awake for hours, rifle across his lap, waiting. Abigail stayed close to the children, hand always near the knife at her belt, eyes flicking to every shadow. The man who haunted them wasn't gone. Just past dawn it happened. Colton stepped outside with Ethan heading for the creek. The air was sharp, the ground white with frost. Hoofbeats pounded hard and fast. Colton shoved Ethan behind him. "Run to the cabin, get your sister, go!" Ethan hesitated, then bolted. Colton turned as the rider crested the rise. Rowan Pike, gaunt, pale, but alive. Rifle raised. Colton fired first. His shot tore into Rowan's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Rowan answered back. The bullet grazed Colton's side, burning hot. He staggered, teeth clenched, but didn't drop his rifle. The cabin door burst open. Abigail stepped out, Lydia in her arms, Ethan behind her, gripping a pistol far too big for him. "Get inside," Colton shouted. Abigail ignored him. She shoved Lydia into Ethan's arms. "Take her, don't stop running." Ethan's eyes widened. "But go," she barked. He obeyed, sprinting across the yard as Lydia wailed in his arms. Rowan's grin spread wide and ugly. "Looks like I still win." Colton fired again, but Rowan already swung his rifle toward the children. Abigail didn't think. She ran. The shot cracked. For a heartbeat, Colton thought he'd lost her. But Abigail hit Rowan full force, tackling him off his horse. They crashed into the snow, his rifle flying loose. Colton charged, blood seeping hot down his side. Rowan snarled, seizing Abigail's wounded arm and twisting until she cried out. She drove her knee into his ribs, brutal, refusing to let go. Colton reached them just as Rowan wrenched free, pistol flashing from his belt. Colton didn't stop to aim. He fired point blank. The bullet struck Rowan in the chest. His eyes widened, blood blooming across his coat. He fell back into the snow, silent. Colton lowered the rifle slowly, breath ragged. Abigail stared at Rowan's body chest heaving until she finally looked up. "It's over." Colton nodded once, trembling, unsure if he believed it. Ethan ran back across the yard. Lydia clutched tight. "Pa, is he gone?" Colton pulled them close, voice low. "Yeah, he's gone." Abigail knelt beside them, her hand brushing Lydia's cheek. For the first time in weeks, the tension eased from her face. That night, Colton buried Rowan Pike on the far edge of the property, marking the grave with nothing more than a jagged stone. Abigail stood beside him, silent, her hand resting lightly on his. When it was done, they walked back to the cabin together. Inside, Ethan and Lydia slept curled by the fire. Colton watched them a long while, then turned to Abigail. "You could leave now," he said quietly. Her brows furrowed. "Do you want me to leave?" "Colton?" Hayes shook his head. "No, I want you to stay, but I won't chain you here if you don't want it." Abigail Monroe's gaze softened. "Colton, this is the first place that's felt like home in years. I'm not going anywhere." He stepped closer, fingers brushing hers. "Then we start over." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "We already have." But as spring thawed, the hills' word of Rowan Pike's death spread. Not all his allies were willing to let it rest. Colton's fight wasn't over. Not yet. The thaw came early that year, melting snow into rushing streams, turning pasture dark and rich. Life stirred again on the ranch. Fences stood firm. New calves bawled in the barn. And for the first time since Margaret Maggie Lane's death, Colton felt his chest loosen, breath coming free. Abigail, no longer a stranger or a runaway, moved through the cabin like she had always belonged, cooking with Ethan, reading by the fire, to Lydia, carrying water without being asked. Lydia clung to her skirts, unwilling to let go. Ethan, quieter, began looking at her like family. Colton watched it all with quiet awe, sometimes pausing mid-hammer swing just to breathe it in. The ranch was alive again. Still, his rifle never sat far from reach. The first sign came nailed to a fence post, a dead crow. Colton spotted it before Ethan could tore it down and buried it beneath the snow. That night, Abigail caught the storm in his silence. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "Nothing the children need to know." Her eyes said she didn't believe him. Later, when the kids were asleep, she stood by the window. "He's back." Colton didn't answer. "You should have killed him," she murmured. "Maybe, but that would have made me just like him." "You're nothing like him," she said firmly. The nights grew restless. Footprints appeared near the barn, always just out of reach. Ethan woke in the dark, whispering he'd heard someone. Colton kept vigil rifle across his knees. Abigail stayed close to the children, hand brushing the knife at her belt ties, on every shadow. Then came dawn. Colton and Ethan were heading for the creek when hoofbeats thundered. Colton shoved Ethan behind him. "Run to the cabin. Get your sister." "Go." Ethan bolted. Rowan Pike crested the rise gaunt, but a live rifle raised. Colton fired first, the bullet ripping Rowan's shoulder. Rowan's return shot grazed Colton's side fire, burning through him. The cabin door flew open. Abigail burst out with Lydia in her arms, Ethan behind her, with a pistol too big for his hands. "Get inside!" Colton roared. Abigail ignored him. She shoved Lydia into Ethan's arms. "Take her! Don't stop running! Go!" she barked when he hesitated. Ethan sprinted Lydia, crying in his arms. Rowan's grin split wide. "Looks like I still win." Colton fired again, but Rowan already swung his rifle toward the children. Abigail ran without thinking. The shot rang out. For a heartbeat, Colton thought she'd fallen. But Abigail slammed into Rowan, tackling him off his horse. They hit the snow hard, his rifle flying loose. Colton charged blood soaking his shirt. Rowan twisted Abigail's injured arm, making her cry out, but she drove her knee into his ribs, refusing to release him. Colton reached them just as Rowan wrenched free, pistol flashing. Colton didn't stop to aim. He fired point blank. The bullet tore through Rowan's chest. His eyes widened in disbelief before he crumpled into the snow, silent forever. Colton lowered the rifle chest, heaving. Abigail stared at the body, breath ragged. Finally, she whispered, It's over. He nodded, though trembling, unsure if he believed. Ethan ran back. Lydia clutched tight. Pa, is he gone? Colton pulled them in close. Yeah, he said softly. He's gone. Abigail knelt beside them, her hand brushing Lydia's cheek. The hardness in her face finally eased. That night, Colton buried Rowan Pike on the far edge of the land, marking the grave with a jagged stone. Abigail stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his. When it was done, they walked back to the cabin together. Inside, Ethan and Lydia were curled by the fire, already asleep. Colton studied them for a long time, then turned to Abigail. You could leave now, he said quietly. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.